My father slapped me across the face in front of 50 guests on Christmas Eve. My crime? Defending my grandfather after my mother called him a useless burden. As the crystal chandeliers glittered, my father screamed at me to take the old man and get out. We were thrown out into the snow, disowned, with nothing but the old clothes on our backs. That was the night my life ended, and the night it truly began. My name is Reagan Fox. I am 29 years old, and until tonight, I was the event manager for the Ever Harbor Living Group. It sounds important, but it is not. The Ever Harbor Living Group is my parents' empire, a sprawling chain of luxury retirement communities, and I am, as my father so often implies, the blue-collar daughter, the one who handles the logistics, the catering contracts, the floral arrangements, the one who makes the parties look good, while my parents build the brand. Tonight was the pinnacle of that brand, the annual Fox Family Christmas Eve Gala. Our home, a sprawling stone and glass mansion in the wealthiest suburb of Denver, was suffocating in its own perfection. A 20-foot fir tree, dripping with crystal ornaments, stood in the grand hall. The air was thick with the scent of pine, expensive perfume, and the simmering aroma of a dinner for 50 prepared by a catering team I had personally vetted. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light onto the faces of businessmen, local politicians, and their wives, all laughing with that tight, brittle sound that passes for joy in these circles. My father, Gregory Fox, stood near the fireplace. At 58, he was a commanding presence, his tailored suit immaculate, his silver hair catching the light. He was holding a glass of champagne, not to drink, but as a prop for his speech. "And as we look to the new year," he boomed, his voice resonating with the false sincerity that had built his company, "we are thrilled to announce our expansion into Florida. The Ever Harbor Gold Coast residences will redefine elder care, because at Ever Harbor, we treat our residents like what they are, family." A polite murmur of applause. I watched him and felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I knew what family meant to him. My mother, Elise, glided through the room. She was 56 and looked a decade younger. Her life's work dedicated to image management, both for the company and herself. She touched a guest's arm, adjusted an ornament on the tree, and then paused to fix her own hair, her eyes scanning the room for any imperfection, any crack in the facade. She was the one who insisted on these parties, the one who reviewed the guest list not for friendship, but for strategic value. She demanded we smile, always smile, at the correct angle, for the invisible cameras of high society. And then there was my grandfather, Walter Fox. He was seated at the far end of the long, formal dining table, a place of honor that was, in reality, a place of exile. At nearly 80 years old, he was confined to a wheelchair. He wore an old, faded wool sweater, a soft brown color that seemed jarringly out of place against the shimmering silver and white of my mother's table setting. He was a prop, just like my father's champagne glass, a required piece of the family image, proof that Gregory Fox cared for his own father. But they did not care. Only I cared. I drifted away from the chattering groups, my own champagne flute untouched, and made my way to his side. The noise of the party seemed to fade as I approached. "Are you warm enough, Grandpa?" I whispered, bending down to tuck the cashmere blanket more snugly around his knees. He looked up, his eyes, watery and blue, finding mine. They were still sharp, still full of a life that the rest of the room refused to see. He gave me a small, grateful smile. "I'm fine, Reagan, just watching the show. Can I get you some water? Or more of the roast beef?" No, I'm all right." His hand, thin and mottled with age spots, rested on the arm of his chair. I straightened his napkin and poured him a fresh glass of water, ignoring the slight frown my mother shot me from across the room. I was breaking the perfect picture. I was interacting with the scenery. I felt like an alien in my own home. I worked for my father's company. I organized the groundbreaking ceremonies, the grand openings, the galas. I wrote the press releases that used words like dignity and compassion And every day, I saw the hypocrisy. I saw how my parents spoke to the staff, how they obsessed over profit margins, and how they treated their own patriarch, my grandfather. The man who had taught me to ride a bike and to identify constellations was now just a piece of decor, a box to be checked on the list of things a good family does. My father's voice droned on about 5-star amenities and holistic wellness. I turned back to my grandfather, trying to shield him with my presence, to create a small, quiet bubble in the suffocating noise. And then it happened. My grandfather reached for his water glass. His hand, which had been steady just a moment before, began to tremble. It was a small tremor, a sign of the Parkinson's we were told not to discuss. The tremor worsened. His knuckles brushed the side of a heavy silver boat filled with cranberry sauce. It tipped, slowly, almost gracefully. A thick, dark red river of sauce bled onto the pristine white Italian linen. It spread like a wound, a shocking, vivid stain against the perfect backdrop. The music, a soft classical quartet, seemed to stop. My father's speech died in his throat. Every laugh, every whispered conversation ceased. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled, first to the stain and then to the man in the wheelchair. My grandfather looked at the spreading red mess, his face pale with a mixture of confusion and humiliation. "Oh," he whispered. "Oh, dear. I'm so sorry." Elise, my mother, Elise Fox, turned. Her body went rigid. The practiced smile, the hostess with the mostest charm, vanished. Her face, which she had spent so much money to keep smooth, became a mask of cold fury. She strode to the table. Her voice was not a yell. It was worse. It was a sharp, sibilant hiss that cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Do you know how much this linen costs?" she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea?" "Elise," my father started, a warning tone in his voice. This was not part of the script. She ignored him. Her eyes locked on my grandfather. "You are a burden," she spat. "A useless, old man. All you do is sit in that chair and take from this family. You can't even hold a spoon. You just sit there and eat and ruin everything." The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in the glasses. The guests, these titans of industry and their polished wives, stared at their plates. They studied their cuticles. They pretended they were deaf, dumb, and blind. They did nothing. I looked at my grandfather. His head was bowed. His shoulders, thin beneath the old sweater, were shaking. I watched as a single tear escaped his eye, rolled down the deep line of his cheek, and splashed onto the fabric of his old trousers. And something inside me broke. The blood rushed to my head, hot and loud, my hands clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms so hard I thought I might draw blood. He was being humiliated in front of everyone, and not a single person, not even his own son, would stand up for him. I moved. My chair scraped back, the legs screeching against the polished marble, and it tipped over, hitting the floor with a loud, definitive crash. Every head snapped toward me. I walked to my mother, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I stood directly in front of her, so close I could smell her expensive, choking perfume. "Apologize to him," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was low and cold and vibrated with a rage I had never known I possessed. "Right now," my mother's eyes widened, shocked at the defiance. "Reagan, don't you dare!" "Apologize to him?" "Reagan!" My father's voice was a roar. He was at my side in an instant, his face purple with anger. The partners, the investors, were all watching. His perfect family image was crumbling. "What do you think you're doing? Sit down. You are embarrassing me in front of my partners." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. For the first time in my 29 years, I did not flinch. I did not cower. I looked my father, Gregory Fox, the CEO, the patriarch, directly in the eye. "I will not sit down," I said, my voice shaking but holding steady. Not while he is being humiliated. He is your father. I don't know what he saw in my eyes. Defiance? Disgust? Or maybe, for the first time, he saw a person who was not just an extension of his will. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap cracked through the room. It was sharp, definitive. My head snapped to the side, my cheek instantly on fire. The 50 guests gasped as one, the wineglass in his other hand, forgotten, slammed against the edge of the marble table and shattered, red wine and glass spraying onto the floor. "You want to protect that useless old man?" he screamed, his face inches from mine, spittle flying. "Then get out. Get out of my house. Take him with you. And don't ever come back." There was a moment of pure, frozen silence. I turned my head, the sting on my cheek radiating heat. I looked at my mother. Elise Fox stood beside her husband. She did not move to help me. She did not look at my bleeding lip. She did not defend her only child. She simply, calmly, reached out and placed her hand on my father's arm. It was a small gesture, but it was a declaration. In this war, they were on the same side, the side of money, and image, and power. I was shaking. A deep, bone-rattling tremor started in my legs and worked its way up, but I did not cry. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too absolute. I turned away from them. I walked past the stunned guests, past the table laden with food that would now go uneaten. I walked to the end of the table where my grandfather sat, a silent, terrified witness to it all. I knelt beside his wheelchair. The room, the people, the house, all of it faded away. There was only his face. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice thick. "We're leaving." I gripped the handles of his wheelchair. I turned him around, and I began to push. We moved through the 2 long rows of guests. No one met my eye. They were all statues, frozen in their expensive clothes. We went through the grand hall, past the towering tree with its mocking, joyful lights. I reached the massive, carved oak front door. With one hand, I pulled it open. A gust of freezing Colorado air hit us. Snow was falling, thick and silent, blanketing the manicured lawn in a perfect, clean white. The lights of the house, the ones I had spent a week coordinating, were still blazing behind us, illuminating the driveway. I pushed my grandfather out into the cold night. The heavy door slammed shut behind us. The sound was final, a period at the end of a life. The house was gone. My family was gone. As the snow began to melt in my hair and on my grandfather's old wool sweater, I knew that house was no longer my home, and the only family I had left in the world was the trembling old man I was pushing into the dark. I didn't have a car at the house. My father had bought me a leased luxury sedan that was registered to the company. I hadn't even grabbed a coat. We just had the clothes on our backs and the cashmere blanket I'd wrapped around Grandpa's legs. I used my phone to call a rideshare, requesting the largest SUV they had, one with wheelchair accessibility. The driver was silent and grim-faced as we loaded my grandfather in, the snow swirling around the open door. The drive from the opulent hills of our Denver suburb to my small, rented apartment in Aurora took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of staring out the window, the fiery handprint on my cheek throbbing in time with the windshield wipers. My grandfather said nothing. He just sat, his head resting against the cold glass, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. The building I lived in was a 3-story walk-up from the 1970s. All brown brick and sagging balconies. The hallway was narrow, the industrial carpet worn thin and stained. The air was thick with the competing smells of old grease, curry, and stale cigarette smoke. From behind the doors, I could hear the muffled sounds of a Spanish-language game show and a baby crying. Our unit was on the 3rd floor. The elevator whined and groaned as we ascended, the metal box rattling so hard I had to brace the wheelchair. When the doors finally shuttered open, I pushed him out onto the landing and fumbled for my keys. The moment I opened the door, shame hit me like a physical wave. I had been working 70-hour weeks. The apartment was a disaster. A stack of dishes teetered in the sink. A pile of mail covered the tiny kitchen counter. The beige paint, which had been there when I moved in, was peeling near the window frame. It was small, cramped, and it smelled like my exhaustion. It's a mess. I'm so sorry. Grandpa? I stammered, frantically pushing the wheelchair into the middle of the small living room so I could dash around. I threw old magazines into a recycling bin, kicked a pair of running shoes into the closet, and wiped the counter with a damp paper towel. I was trying to erase my own silent struggles before he could see them. He just sat there, watching me with those quiet, patient eyes. Let me get you settled, I said, my voice high and thin. I didn't have a guest room. I had a one-bedroom apartment. I pushed his chair into my own room, which was just large enough for a queen bed and a dresser. I helped him out of the chair, my movements clumsy, and settled him on the edge of my bed. It was past 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve. We hadn't eaten. The feast we'd left behind flashed in my mind. The prime rib, the roasted vegetables, the Yule log cake. You must be hungry, I said, trying to sound cheerful. Let me make us a feast. The feast consisted of the contents of my refrigerator. I had a half-eaten rotisserie chicken I'd bought on sale 3 days ago, a tub of instant mashed potatoes, and a bag of frozen green beans. I microwaved it all, the plastic containers warping from the heat. I arranged it on my 2 good plates, found the silverware I hadn't left in the sink, and brought it to the bedroom. I pulled my desk chair over for myself and set his plate on a baking sheet on his lap. It looked pathetic. The chicken was dry, the potatoes were lumpy, and the green beans were watery. My voice, when I spoke, was a small, tight knot. I'm so sorry. Grandpa, it's not exactly a Christmas dinner, I promise. Tomorrow I'll go out and I'll get something better, something more fitting. He looked at the plate. He looked around my small, messy room. Then he looked at me, his gaze so full of a feeling I couldn't name. He reached out his thin, trembling hand and laid it over mine. Reagan, he said, his voice a low rumble. Anywhere with you is home. That's when I broke. The dam of shock and adrenaline and 29 years of suppressed rage just shattered. I bent over, my head dropping to my knees, and I sobbed. I cried for the humiliation, for the slap, for the coldness of my parents, and for the simple, profound kindness of the man in front of me. I cried for the years I had wasted trying to earn their love, and I cried in terror of the future. He said nothing. He just let his hand rest on my hair, his fingers gently stroking my head, until the sobs finally quieted into ragged, gasping breaths. The next few days were a blur of logistics. My first act was to drain my savings account. It wasn't much, just a few $1,000s I'd been trying to stash away. It was gone in an instant. I bought a used hospital bed online, one with a crank that could lift his head and feet. I sold my own queen mattress to a consignment shop to make room for it. I went to a home improvement store and bought cheap, rubber-backed rugs to cover the vinyl floors so his wheelchair wouldn't slip. I bought a sheet of plywood and some 2x4s and built a crude, wobbly ramp over the linoleum lip that led into the bathroom. The bills piled up with terrifying speed. His medications alone cost hundreds of dollars. Then there was the rent, the specialized food for his diet, the copays for doctor visits, the adult diapers, the medical supplies. My salary from Ever Harbor Living, which I knew would be cut off the second my father's HR department processed the termination, was not going to be enough. I was an event manager, and I had just become the sole caregiver for an elderly man with significant medical needs. I needed money, immediately. I kept my job at Ever Harbor for as long as I could, swallowing my pride and logging in every morning, clearing my email, and coordinating with vendors for events I knew I'd never be allowed to attend. I needed the paycheck. But it wasn't enough. The first extra job I found was at a small, dark neighborhood bar a few miles from my apartment. I worked from 6 o'clock in the evening until 2 in the morning, 4 nights a week. I came home smelling of stale beer and fried onions, my feet aching, my pockets heavy with a few dollars in cash tips. The second job was a bitter, painful irony. I took a weekend position as a late-night cleaner. It was at a nursing home, an Ever Harbor Living nursing home, one of the lower-tier facilities in my father's portfolio. I applied using my middle name and a shortened version of my last name. No one recognized me. The daughter of the CEO was now, from midnight until 6 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays, scrubbing toilets, mopping floors, and emptying trash bins filled with the refuse of the elderly. My life became a relentless, exhausting cycle. Wake up at 7, get Grandpa washed, dressed, and fed, work my corporate job from home, fielding passive-aggressive emails from my former colleagues, log off at 5, make dinner for Grandpa, run to the bar at 5:30, serve drinks and wipe down tables until 2 in the morning, drive home, sleep for 3 hours, wake up and do it all again. On weekends, I would leave the bar and go straight to the cleaning job, my body moving on autopilot, my mind numb. My hands, once manicured for galas, became chapped and raw, with a permanent small burn on my right forearm from the bar's industrial dishwasher. My grandfather saw it. Of course, he saw the new lines of exhaustion etched around my eyes. He saw the way I winced when I bent over to help him. "Reagan," he said one afternoon, his voice heavy with guilt. "This is too much for you. Let me just go into one of those places. The state. They have places. I don't want to be a burden." He used that word, the word my mother had used, burden. I stopped what I was doing. I was on my knees, adjusting the drainage bag on his catheter. I looked up at him, my heart aching. I dropped the supplies and crawled over to his wheelchair. I put my hands on his knees and looked him square in the eye. "You are not a burden," I said, my voice fierce. "You are my family. If you go, I will have no one left. I can handle this. I promise you, Grandpa, I can handle this." He looked at me for a long time, his chin trembling. He nodded. Once, we never spoke of it again. We found a new rhythm, a new kind of family. In the small moments between the jobs, we lived. We watched cooking shows on his old, small television, and he would critique the chef's knife skills. "Sloppy," he'd mutter. "His wrist is all wrong." He told me stories I had never heard, about his life as a carpenter before he met my grandmother, about building houses with his own hands. He taught me how to fold the cheap paper napkins I'd bought into elegant swans, a trick from his youth. He would watch me as I rushed around, late for a shift, and say, "Stop, shoulders back. Reagan, you're leading with your chin. A professional server always stands tall." The exhaustion was a constant, heavy blanket. But one night, I came home later than usual. It was nearly 4 in the morning. My cleaning shift had run long. I was so tired I could barely see. I unlocked my door, expecting to find him asleep in his hospital bed. Instead, he was sitting in his wheelchair in the living room, his head slumped forward, asleep. The lamp was on. On the small table beside him was a tangle of cheap yarn and a pair of knitting needles, and next to them, a small, lumpy, half-finished rectangle of wool. He was trying to knit a scarf. I picked it up. It was full of dropped stitches and uneven rows. I saw a small note scrawled on a piece of paper. "For your neck. It is cold on the way home." Our tiny, cold apartment, with its peeling paint and rattling elevator, was starting to feel warm. It smelled of chicken soup, which I now made in a large batch every Sunday. It smelled of his medications and my cheap coffee. In that small space, I realized that every decent thing in me, my patience, my work ethic, my ability to feel empathy, had not come from my powerful, wealthy, cold-hearted parents. It had come from this old man in a wheelchair, the man they had thrown away like trash. One morning, about a month after that Christmas, I was sitting with him. We were having breakfast, oatmeal and the cheap coffee. It was a Saturday, and for the first time, I had a day free. I had been fired from the bar for being 10 minutes late, and I hadn't found a replacement job yet. We were quiet, enjoying the rare moment of calm. Suddenly, he set his spoon down. He looked at me, his eyes clear and sharp, with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. "This coming weekend," he said, his voice perfectly level and calm, "I need you to take off all your shifts, all of them. I want you to drive me somewhere. I was startled. Drive you where, Grandpa? To the doctor? Since we'd moved in, he had never asked to go anywhere except for his required appointments. No, he said. He folded his hands on the blanket in his lap. Not to the doctor. I want you to take me to a place that belongs to us. A shiver went down my spine. It wasn't just his words. It was the look in his eye. The fog of confusion and age I had grown accustomed to was gone. In its place was a hard, clear, focused intelligence. I was nervous. I was intrigued. And for the first time in a long time, I was a little bit afraid. I managed to get the shifts covered. I called the cleaning service supervisor and told them I had a severe stomach flu, a lie that felt clumsy and obvious. I called the new bar where I was training, my third bar job in as many weeks, and said there was a family emergency. That one, at least, felt true. The next morning, I bundled my grandfather into my beat-up, 15-year-old sedan. The car's heater rattled and smelled like burning dust, a stark contrast to the chauffeured cars of my previous life. I had a quarter tank of gas and about $43 in my checking account, but he had been so insistent, so strangely clear, that I didn't question him. Where are we going? I asked again, pulling out of the apartment complex's icy parking lot. Head west, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Towards the mountains. I will tell you where to turn. We drove. We left the sprawl of Aurora, with its payday loan shops and endless fast food chains. We passed through the manicured, soulless suburbs of Denver, the neighborhoods my parents' company built communities for. We moved past the edge of the city, and the landscape began to climb. The buildings fell away, replaced by sweeping foothills and, eventually, the sharp, snow-dusted peaks of the Front Range. The roads became smaller. The 4-lane highway became a 2-lane state road. He directed me onto an even smaller county road, where the pavement was cracked and the shoulder disappeared. Snow began to fall. Not a blizzard, just a light, cinematic dusting that clung to the pines. An hour passed. We were far from anything. The silence in the car was heavy. I fumbled with the radio, trying to fill the quiet, and it landed on a station playing old, instrumental music, a quiet swell of strings. It sounded like Christmas music, and the sound made my stomach clench. It brought back the smell of pine and cranberry, the sound of my father's voice screaming, the sharp sting of his hand on my face. Turn here, my grandfather said suddenly. I slowed the car. Where? There's nothing here. I looked out the window. There was no road, just a wall of dark pine trees and what looked like a service path. Here, Reagan, stop. I pulled over, and as the trees cleared, I saw it. Set back from the road, almost hidden by the forest, was a gate. It was not a gate like the flimsy aluminum one at my apartment complex, or the modern, minimalist one at my parents' house. This was a wall of black iron, 20 feet high, massive and imposing. It was art, scrolled and twisted into intricate patterns, and at its center, a heavy, sculpted logo. It looked like an intertwined Q and W. Below it, in elegant, severe letters, were 2 words, Quinwood Estates. I stared at the name, Quinwood. I had spent 7 years at Ever Harbor Living Group. I had seen every vendor list, every subcontractor, every holding company, every shell corporation my father used. I had never, not once, seen the name Quinwood. Grandpa, this isn't an Ever Harbor property, I said, my voice small. I think we're trespassing. No, he said, we are not. I was about to reach for the intercom box, set on a stone pillar, but he put his hand on my arm. Just wait. A moment later, a small red light on the pillar blinked. A camera, high on the stone archway, swiveled, paused on my car's rusty license plate, and then swiveled again, zooming in on the passenger side window. It focused directly on my grandfather's face. There was a heavy mechanical thunk, and the massive iron gates began to swing inward, silent as a tomb. As the gates opened, 2 men stepped out from a small stone guardhouse I hadn't even noticed. They were not security guards in baggy polos. They were dressed in immaculate dark green uniforms with pressed shoulders and flat caps. They were professionals. They stood at attention. As my rusty sedan chugged past them, they did not look at me. They looked directly at my grandfather, and as one, they bowed. It was not a nod. It was a deep, formal, deferential bow from the waist. "Welcome back, Mr. Fox," one of them said, his voice deep and respectful. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Grandpa," I whispered. "What is this? Who are you?" "Just drive, Reagan," he said, his eyes fixed forward. "Slowly." The road inside was not asphalt. It was paved with smooth white stones, meticulously cleared of snow. It wound through a forest of ancient pine trees, each one perfectly spaced and trimmed, as if a giant had manicured the mountainside. We passed a formal rose garden, the bushes dormant but carefully wrapped in burlap for the winter. We passed a small lake, its surface a perfect sheet of gray ice, reflecting the somber sky. This was not my parents' wealth. Theirs was new, all glass and steel and sharp angles, designed to impress, to intimidate. This was something else. This was old. This was permanent. This felt like a different century. The road curved, and the house came into view. I had to physically press the brake, the car skidding slightly on the stones. It wasn't a house. It was a European estate, ripped from a magazine I could never afford. It was 3 stories of heavy gray stone, with a steep, dark, red-tiled roof and chimneys pluming gentle smoke. Curved iron balconies hung from massive windows. A wide stone terrace overlooked the valley, which now lay thousands of feet below us. As I pulled the car into the cobblestone motor court, my old sedan looking like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace, the massive front doors of the house swung open, and people came out. Not one person, a line of them, at least a dozen. They formed 2 rows on the steps, a human pathway. There was a man in a black suit who could only be a butler. There were women in crisp, gray and white uniforms. There were men in chef's whites, their tall hats visible even from the car. They stood in the falling snow, their hands clasped, and as I got out of the car to get the wheelchair from the trunk, they all bowed, just like the guards at the gate. A woman broke from the line. She was elderly, with silver hair pulled into a tight, severe bun, but her face was frantic with emotion. She ran, or as close to running as her age would allow, down the steps, her sensible black shoes crunching on the stone. She didn't even look at me. She went straight to the passenger door, which I had just opened. She crouched down, her hands shaking, tears streaming openly down her cheeks. "Mr. Fox," she said, her voice thick with sobs. "Oh, sir, Mr. Fox, we thought you would never return. We thought you were gone." My grandfather looked at her. His voice was not the thin, reedy voice of the sick man in my apartment. It was stronger, clearer. "I am back, Eleanor," he said. He placed his hand on her head, a gesture of comfort. Then he looked at me, as I stood there, frozen, holding the folded wheelchair. "And this," he said, his voice projecting so everyone on the steps could hear, "is the only one I am bringing with me." He nodded toward me. The woman, Eleanor, finally looked at me, her tear-filled eyes wide and assessing. The entire staff looked at me. "This is my granddaughter, Reagan Fox," my grandfather announced to the assembled staff, "the only one who treated me like family." I felt a hot, bright blush cover my entire body. I was standing in a pair of stained jeans, my old winter coat, and the sneakers I wore to my cleaning job, in front of 20 people who looked like they'd stepped out of a period drama. The butler and another footman took the wheelchair from my numb hands, their movements practiced and efficient. They helped my grandfather transfer, and then the butler, Mrs. Albright, and the rest of the staff parted, and they began to wheel him inside. I just followed, a ghost in their wake. I stepped into the foyer, and my breath caught. If my parents' house was about impressing, this was about dwarfing. The ceiling was 30, maybe 40 feet high. A massive carved wooden staircase split into two curved wings and swept up to a gallery above. A chandelier hung in the center, not crystal like my mother's, but heavy, dark brass, built to hold 100 real candles. But it was the walls that made me stop. They were covered in photographs, dozens of framed, black and white images. I moved closer, dazed. They weren't family portraits. They were pictures of factories, workshops, men in hard hats operating massive saws, diagrams of hotels, pictures of storefronts, all with the same logo, Quinwood Industries. And then I saw him. In picture after picture, there was my grandfather, not as I knew him, but a man in his 40s and 50s. He was standing tall, not sitting. He was wearing a sharp suit, shaking hands with a man who looked like a governor. He was on a factory floor, laughing with dozens of workers. He was cutting a ribbon in front of a grand hotel, the Quinwood logo on the podium. His face was not the face of a failure. It was the face of a founder, a builder. It was brimming with confidence, power, and intelligence. The story my parents had fed me my entire life. Grandpa was a simple carpenter. He lost the little business he had. He made bad deals and we had to save him. It all echoed in my head. A sick, discordant lie. "May I take your coat, Miss Reagan?" A young woman in a uniform was standing at my elbow, her eyes cast down. "Miss Reagan." I was startled. I was used to being Reagan, or, more often, just Fox. I fumbled with my zipper, my hands still shaking. "Oh, yes, thank you." I felt like an imposter. I was a girl who scrubbed toilets and smelled like stale beer, and they were calling me Miss Reagan. I didn't belong in this world. This was a mistake. "This way, please," the butler said. His name, I learned, was Mr. Hemlock. He led us down a wide, wood-paneled hall. My grandfather directed him to the study. We entered a room that was larger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered 3 walls, packed with leather-bound volumes. A fireplace, big enough for me to stand inside, roared with a massive, crackling fire. In the center was a desk, not a modern piece of glass, but a single, massive piece of dark, polished wood. A wall of windows looked out over the snow-covered forest, the view unbroken for miles. "Mr. Hemlock wheeled my grandfather behind the desk. Mrs. Albright fussed around him. "Sir, shall I fetch your tea? A blanket? Should I call the doctor to check on you?" My grandfather held up one hand. It was a small gesture, but the entire room fell instantly silent. The authority in that simple movement was absolute. "Leave us," he said. His voice was the one I had heard in the car. It was the voice of the man in the photographs. "Everyone, I will speak with my granddaughter, alone." Mrs. Albright looked like she wanted to protest, but one look from him, and she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Fox?" The staff filed out. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the large, quiet room. It was just the two of us. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. He gestured to a deep green leather armchair that faced the desk. "Sit down, Reagan." I sat, my knees barely holding me. I felt small, like a child called to the principal's office. He took a moment, maneuvering his wheelchair into place behind the massive desk. He belonged there. He looked at me, his eyes not the cloudy, watery eyes of the man in Aurora, but the sharp, piercing blue eyes of the man who had built all of this. He looked at me for a long, heavy minute, and I saw the sadness return, a profound weight in his gaze. "You look frightened," he said. I swallowed, my throat dry. "I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. Grandpa, what is this place? Who are all these people? My parents? My parents said you were, they said." He held up his hand again, and I fell silent. "It is time," he said, his voice low and heavy, "that you heard a different story about this family, the one you were never told. I gripped the soft leather arms of the chair, my knuckles turning white. I felt the floor drop out from under me. In that instant, I knew, with chilling certainty, that the slap on Christmas Eve was not the end of my life. It was the end of a lie, and every single thing I thought I knew about the Fox family, about my parents, and about the quiet, broken man in front of me, was about to be burned to the ground. His voice, in the quiet of that grand, fire-lit room, was not the voice of the frail man I had rescued from my parents' home. That voice had been thin, often confused, hesitant. This voice was heavy. It was weighted with the authority of the man behind the desk and burdened by the history he was about to unearth. "What you were told," he began, his hands resting on the polished wood, "was a story, a very carefully crafted, very expensive story, written by your mother and paid for by your father. The truth. The truth is what I was building long before either of them." He told me about Quinwood Industries. He had started it, not with an inheritance or an investment, but with his own 2 hands. He was a master carpenter, and his small shop building custom furniture had grown, contract by contract, into the most respected name in bespoke commercial interiors in the United States. "We did not just make furniture, Reagan," he said, his eyes distant, seeing the past. "We built the interiors, the grand libraries, the bars, the presidential suites. If you stayed in a 5-star hotel in this country in the 1980s, you were touching my work. Quinwood was synonymous with quality, with honor." I sat, motionless, a fraud in the expensive leather chair. I, who had just been scrubbing toilets for minimum wage. "I had only one child," he continued, and the warmth in his voice chilled. "Your father, Gregory, I gave him everything, the best schools, an MBA, and when he graduated, I brought him into the company. I made him chief financial officer. I trusted him with my legacy. And then came my mother, Elise. She was beautiful, ambitious, so charming. She was perfect for public relations. She handled our marketing, our image. We were, for a time, the perfect Quinn family brand, as she called it. She was the one who insisted we use the Quinwood name for everything. The press loved her. They loved the story of the family business. Then, the story turned. "When you were small," he said, "about 5 or 6 years old, the market took a nosedive, a deep recession. Hotels stopped building. Our big contracts were put on hold. We were leveraged, as any growing company is. But I was not worried. I had a plan." His plan was to hold the line, to keep his master craftsmen on the payroll, even at a loss, to refuse to compromise on the quality of the wood, the finishes. A reputation. "Reagan," he said, leaning forward in his chair, "takes 30 years to build and 30 minutes to destroy. I would not destroy Quinwood to save a few dollars on a quarterly report." But Gregory, his CFO, his son, had disagreed. "Your father saw things differently. He saw numbers, not people. He saw profit, not honor. Cut the corners, Dad." He would scream at me in the boardroom. "Use particle board instead of solid oak. Subcontract the labor. Who cares if it falls apart in 5 years? As long as we get the check and the stock price stays up, that is all that matters." I could picture it. I had seen flashes of that man my entire life. "We fought," Walter said, his voice flat. "Many times, in this very room, I told him we would not compromise our name. He would storm out, red-faced, calling me a dinosaur, a fool, and your mother, Elise. She would always run after him, always smoothing his feathers, telling him he was the visionary, telling him I was just an old man stuck in the past. She was always on his side." The fire crackled, filling the heavy silence. I felt a cold dread rising from my stomach. "I was busy," my grandfather said, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I was flying to New York, to Chicago, trying to personally save our relationships with the hotel chains. I was trying to keep the ship afloat. And while I was busy plugging the holes, my own son was drilling new ones in the hull. He told me that while he was fighting for the company's survival, Gregory was systematically stealing it. He began to copy everything: our complete client lists, our proprietary designs, the ones that made us unique, our pricing structures. He packaged up 25 years of my life's work, and he secretly began to funnel it to a new group of outside investors, a group that was looking to build a new empire, a recession-proof business, luxury housing for the elderly. Ever Harbor. My breath hitched. I felt the blood drain from my face. He had the data, Walter continued, his voice a cold monotone. But he needed capital. He needed cash to prove his value to his new partners, and that is where your mother became truly invaluable. My mother, the head of PR, she began to approve. Expenses, he said, the word dripping with acid. Massive marketing and consulting invoices, tens of thousands of dollars at first, then hundreds of thousands. They were all fake, all payments to shell corporations your father had set up in Delaware. On paper, it looked like our PR budget was simply exploding. In reality, she was bleeding money directly from Quinwood's accounts and funneling it into his. It was clean. It was meticulous. It was perfectly legal, on the surface. The result was inevitable. Quinwood, already stressed by the recession, was being hollowed out from the inside. I was baffled, he said. We were losing contracts we should have won. Competitors were underbidding us by pennies, as if they knew our numbers. Our cash reserves were vanishing. We were suddenly, inexplicably, drowning in debt. The company was becoming toxic. The press, which your mother had so carefully cultivated, suddenly turned. We were old-fashioned, struggling, failing to adapt. And then, the final, public betrayal. One morning, your father appeared on the cover of the Denver Business Chronicle. Gregory Fox, the new visionary, he announced the launch of his new company, Ever Harbor Living Group. He told the reporter he had left his father's failing company over strategic differences. He was the young hero, escaping the sinking ship. He was the one who had sunk it. I felt bile rise in my throat. I remembered that magazine. I was 9. It was framed, on my father's desk. For years, I was told to be proud. I was digging, Walter whispered, his knuckles white on the arms of his chair. I knew something was wrong. I was digging into the accounts, starting to see the patterns, the payments to companies I had never heard of. I was getting close. Reagan, I was too close. He paused, and his eyes closed. And then, the accident. He told me about the rainy night, the drive back from a meeting with the bankers, a logging truck on a mountain road. It lost its brakes, the police report said. It crossed the center line and hit him head-on. I woke up in a hospital bed. The first thing I saw was your parents' faces, looking down at me. They looked so concerned, so grieving. The doctor told me my T10 vertebra was shattered. I would be paralyzed from the waist down, for life. He was trapped, a body that no longer worked, in a company that was collapsing, at the mercy of the 2 people who were destroying him. This, he said, is where they sealed the deal. I was in traction, dosed on morphine, barely lucid, and they came to my bedside. You have to rest, Dad, your mother said, her voice so soft, her hand on my forehead. You've been through so much. Let Gregory take the burden. Let him handle the company. They brought him stacks of papers. Just asset management, Dad, your father said. Giving me power of attorney to pay the debts, to liquidate what we must. I was so tired. The pain, the medication. I trusted him. He was my son. I signed. He opened his eyes, and they were shining with a terrible cold light. I lay in that hospital bed for 3 weeks, and I watched. I watched your father, my son, pace the room, taking calls. His voice broke, just for a second, a single crack in the armor. He was selling the main mill, the Oregon factory, the one I had built with my own hands from the ground up. He sold it. He sold it for 20% of its value to a private equity fund in Switzerland. It took me a year, and my own private investigators, to find out. That fund, It was a shell. He was the fund. He bought my life's work from me, with my money, for pennies on the dollar. While he was helpless, they carved up the corpse of Quinwood, and Elise, my mother, handled the story. She built the new narrative, he said bitterly. Walter Fox, tragically impaired and no longer lucid after his accident, the heroic son, Gregory, and his devoted wife, Elise, stepping in to manage his affairs and take over the family burden, all those perfect family photos you grew up with, Reagan, the charity galas, the pictures of me in a wheelchair, smiling. That was her. That was her masterpiece. It was a lie to hide a grand theft. We were the perfect, caring family, as long as I kept my mouth shut. My stomach coiled. The nausea was overwhelming. My entire childhood, my job, the galas I had planned, the compassionate care narrative I had written press releases for, it was all built on this, on the theft of this man's life, on his broken back. I did get out of the hospital, he said, and I was not as lucid as they had hoped. I got my own lawyers. I found, not all of it, but enough. The transfers, the shell companies. I confronted them. In the house you just left, in that grand living room. And what did they do? Did they beg forgiveness? Elise, your mother, she didn't even blink. She had been prepared for this. She offered me one final contract. He spoke the words as if reciting a curse. Walter will be given a guarantee of lifetime care in the finest Ever Harbor facility. In exchange, he agrees to transfer all remaining claims, all future rights, all shares, to Gregory and Elise Fox. It was a bill of sale. Reagan? They were offering to buy my silence, with a room in the very empire they had built with my stolen money. I refused, he said simply. I told them I would not be a living prop in their disgusting play. I told them to keep their money and their house, and I left. I wheeled myself out the front door with nothing. He looked at me, his face a mask of old, profound pain. And they let me go. They built their entire life, your entire life, on the foundation of Quinwood, on the reputation I had built and the assets they had stolen. Silence. The fire crackled. Oblivious. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed. The man I had been told was a failure, a poor businessman, a burden. He was the founder, my parents. My glamorous, successful, self-made parents were thieves. I didn't tell you this to make you hate them, he said, his voice softening, pulling me back to the present. I told you this because you deserve to know who you are, and where you come from, and what you did. On Christmas Eve, you chose honor, just as I did. He turned his wheelchair to the massive wooden desk. His hand went to a heavy carved drawer. He unlocked it with a small brass key. I thought he was going to pull out money or gold. He did not. He pulled out 3 thick, black, leather-bound binders. He slid them across the polished desk. They landed in front of me with a heavy final thud. I am not just a story, Reagan. My hands were trembling. I opened the first binder. It was not a scrapbook. It was filled with plastic-sleeved pages, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, copies of contracts. I saw the dates. I saw the large, 6-figure transfers to the shell companies in Delaware. I saw your mother's flowing, perfect signature, Elise Fox, on the authorization line for marketing and development. I opened the second binder, printed emails, correspondence between my father, Gregory Fox, and the investment group that had funded Ever Harbor. They were dated 6 months before my grandfather's accident. They outlined, in cold corporate language, the transfer of proprietary data, of client lists. I kept them, my grandfather said, his voice now quiet, weary. I didn't keep them to be right. I didn't keep them to get revenge. I kept them because I knew, one day, the truth would need to have a voice, even if I did not. He placed his hand on top of the third, unopened binder. And this one? This one is for later. I was still staring at the binders, my mind completely numb, unable to process the scale of the betrayal. My hands were flat on my father's forged invoices. "But I don't understand," I whispered, my voice sounding stupid and small in the cavernous room. "If you left with nothing, if they took all this, then what? What is this?" I gestured weakly around us, at the antique desk, the roaring fire, the priceless art on the walls. My grandfather watched me. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by something else, a flicker of the man in the photographs, a hard, patient, indomitable will. "They took Quinwood Industries," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "They did not take Quinwood. They did not take my name, and they did not take my skill." He told me what he did after he wheeled himself out of their lives. He left Denver entirely. He went north, to Wyoming. He had a few $1,000s in a personal account they had missed. With it, he rented a space. It was a 2-car garage, he said. In a town so small it barely had a name. It was freezing. The wind came through the cracks in the walls. He was not alone. 3 men had left Quinwood with him, not executives, not partners, carpenters, his 3 best shop foremen, men who had been with him for over 20 years, men who, as he put it, knew the difference between a veneer and solid wood, in business and in people. "We started again," he said. "From nothing?" I tried to picture it, this man, in his wheelchair, in a freezing garage in the middle of nowhere. "We took any job," he continued. "We fixed bar stools for the local diner. We built new booths for a restaurant that had a fire. We made reception desks for a string of cheap motels along Interstate 80, cash jobs, small jobs." He didn't just supervise. "I couldn't stand," he said. "But my hands still worked. I sat at a drafting table, 12 hours a day, drawing plans on graph paper with a pencil. My back. The pain was constant. I didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time. But I drew, and when the men were cutting, I was sanding. I sat in my chair and I finished every edge myself. It had to be perfect." He leaned forward, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. "The product was always perfect, Reagan, even if it was a chair for a $20 a night motel. The perfection was the only thing I had left. It was my honor." Word got around, as it always does. The old carpenter in the wheelchair, who, along with his small crew, made things that did not break. The quality of their work was so high, it was almost comical in the cheap settings it was built for. A small, independent hotel in Jackson Hole gave us a contract, he said. Then a new boutique chain in Utah. They didn't want the cheap pressboard junk. They wanted quality, and we were the only ones providing it. The orders got bigger. We moved from the garage to a small workshop, then a larger one. He needed a real company, but he could not be Walter Fox. Walter Fox was tragically impaired and lucid, he said, his voice dripping with the memory of my mother's lies. He was a ward of his loving son. He could not be seen to be in business. So he created an entirely new entity, a new name, one I had never heard of. He formed a corporation where, on paper, his 3 loyal foremen were the majority owners. I was just a consultant, he said, a thin, grim smile touching his lips. A silent partner with a 5% stake. I was invisible. He used the very tools my father had used against him. He built a labyrinth of holding companies, trusts, and shell corporations, each one perfectly legal, each one insulating him from discovery. Your father taught me the value of modern finance, he said. He taught me how to hide. The new company grew. It grew fast and it grew quiet, and all the while, he was watching. Gregory was on a selling spree, he said. He was so desperate to build his new Ever Harbor empire. He was liquidating all the old world assets from Quinwood. He saw them as junk, as relics. He sold them for pennies on the dollar, just to get the cash. He paused, and the look he gave me was so intense, it sent a shiver down my spine. He sold the main Quinwood lumber mill in Oregon, he whispered, and my new corporation, hidden behind 3 layers of legal shields, was the buyer. My hand flew to my mouth. He sold the warehouse district in Utah, he continued. My shell company bought it. He liquidated the land, the factories, the storage depots, and I, Walter Fox, the useless old man, bought every single piece. I bought back my entire life, piece by piece, and your father never knew. He thought he was selling to some anonymous investment fund in Switzerland. This house, Quinwood Estates, this was the first thing I bought back, he said. The day Gregory put it on the market, I bought it, through a trust. He thought he had cut me off from my roots. He had no idea I was the one signing his check. I was reeling. My father, my brilliant, arrogant, CEO father, he had been played. He had been outmaneuvered for 2 decades by the very man he dismissed as a dinosaur. But you lived. Where did you live? I stammered. You weren't here. No, he said. I did not live here. I could not risk being seen. I lived in a small, rented room above our new workshop in Wyoming. I ate cheap sandwiches. I wore my old sweaters. He looked down at the faded brown wool he was wearing, the same one from Christmas Eve, the one I had seen him in 100 times. I realized with a jolt that it was not a symbol of his poverty. It was his uniform. It was his armor. I lived like a pauper, he said. While the bank accounts grew, from tens of thousands to millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, I did not care about the money. Reagan, I cared about the work, and I cared about the justice. And then he delivered the final, devastating blow. Your father's empire, Ever Harbor, it was growing. He needed furniture for all those new luxury facilities. He needed beds, and dressers, and nightstands, thousands of them, and he needed them to be high quality, to sell his luxury brand to those poor families. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. His chief procurement officer, a man who had never even worked at the old Quinwood, signed a 3-year exclusive contract with the finest new interiors company in the Mountain West. My company. I could not breathe. It was not possible. Oh, yes, he said, seeing the shock on my face. The beds my father slept in at his house, the elegant chairs in the lobbies you staged your fancy galas in, the nightstands in every single Ever Harbor facility, I built them, I designed them, I sold them, to my own son. Your father, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, has been paying me millions of dollars a year for the privilege of living in the empire he stole from me. He has been, unknowingly, funding my entire operation. He has been paying for this house. He has been paying Eleanor's salary. He has been paying for the very food on his table. And he has no idea. The silence in the room was absolute. This was not just revenge. This was a masterpiece of it. A cold, patient, 20-year-long siege. Eleanor, Mrs. Albright. She knew? Eleanor has been with me since before your father was born. My foreman knew. My lawyers knew. We have all been part of this. We have been watching him live on my money, dine out on my reputation, all while believing he was the self-made king. We let him live in his lie, completely unaware that he was, and always has been, entirely in my debt. His expression softened, and the hardness faded, replaced by the sadness I knew so well. But I watched you, Reagan, he said quietly. That was the hardest part. How? I have people, friends, men and women loyal to me, some of them still working inside Ever Harbor, buried deep in the system. They sent me copies of the internal newsletters, the press releases you wrote, the photos from the events you managed. He looked at the fire. I saw you, standing next to him, at the groundbreaking ceremonies. You were always smiling, so polished, so capable. I was so proud of the woman you were becoming, and I was so angry. Angry at me? No, child, he said, his voice full of pain. Never at you. I was angry that you were trapped in that lie with them. I was angry that you were working so hard to earn the love of 2 people who are nothing but empty, gilded shells. I was glad you were safe, that you had resources, but I hated that you were his daughter, working for his company, my company. He took a deep, ragged breath. And then, I got old. The real old, not the impaired old your mother invented. My body, the pain. It was becoming too much. I knew I did not have many years left, and I had to know. Know what? If he had changed, he whispered. If my son, if any part of the boy I raised was left inside the monster he had become, I had to see for myself. It was the last test. He told me his plan. A year ago, he had set it in motion. He had Eleanor Albright, his loyal housekeeper, discover him. She had called my parents, crying, explaining that Mr. Fox's small disability pension had finally run out, that he was destitute, sick, and had nowhere to go. He said, come home to die. He hid every trace of this. This house was put in the care of his staff. He arrived at my parents' mansion with one suitcase, his wheelchair, and his old sweaters. He intentionally acted meek, quiet, a little confused. The man I had known for the past year, that was a role, a performance. And the test? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It was a failure, he said, his voice flat. The truth was worse than I had ever imagined. In front of guests, I was a prop. I was the beloved patriarch. Your father would pat my shoulder for the cameras. Your mother would fluff my pillow and tell her friends how dearly they were caring for me. His face darkened. But the moment the guests left, I was a dog. I was a piece of furniture that was in the way. I would sit in my chair, in the living room, and they would talk about me, as if I was deaf, as if I was already dead. He recited their words, his voice a perfect, cruel imitation of my mother's. How long do we have to keep this up, Gregory? He's a drain on the staff. And your father? We will put him in the baseline facility in Aurora. It is not like he would know the difference. The blood drained from my face. Aurora, the Ever Harbor facility, the one I had been scrubbing toilets in. They were going to dump him there. In all that coldness, he continued, in that entire empty house, there was one person, you. He looked at me, his eyes now shining with a fierce, sudden emotion. You were the only one who spoke to me. Not about me. You were the one who brought me a glass of water. Not because someone was watching, but because you thought I was thirsty. You were the one who adjusted my blanket, not for show, but because you asked me if I was cold. You saw me. You, who had been raised in their poison, were somehow still good. You were not part of their PR campaign. You were real. I knew. Then, he said. The test was over. Gregory and Elise were gone. There was nothing left to save. But you were still a fox. You were my blood. You were the heir. That is when I began to prepare for the end, he said. I had my lawyers update everything. I gathered those binders. I put the final pieces in place. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. The Christmas Eve party was just the end of the play. Reagan, when your mother called me a burden, I felt nothing, just pity for her empty soul. When your father raised his voice, I felt finality. But then, he said, his eyes locking on mine, you stood up, that chair, the sound of it crashing on the floor. It was the sound of a starting gun. When you, my granddaughter, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, stood between me and your father. He smiled, a true, small, proud smile. I knew the plan was set. I was going to leave that house, but I was no longer going to leave alone. I was going to take the only thing in that entire cursed mansion that was worth saving. I was going to take you. My head was spinning. The room, with its tall, shadowed bookshelves and the roaring fire, felt like it was tilting. My father, the self-made man, was a fraud. My mother, the queen of society, was a thief, and my grandfather, the man I'd been scrubbing toilets to support, was a secret, patient king who had been pulling the strings for 20 years. I stammered, my hands still on the binders. I think I'm going to be sick. Breathe, Reagan, he said, his voice softer now. The story is not over. He gestured with his chin toward a large framed painting on the wall opposite the desk. It was a dark, moody landscape of the Scottish Highlands. Go on, behind that. I stood up, my legs feeling like water. I went to the painting and, feeling like a fool, pushed on it. It didn't budge. It's a painting, Grandpa. To the right, on the frame, the small carving of a thistle. I felt along the heavy gilt frame and my fingers found it. A small, wooden knot. I pressed. There was a faint click, and the entire painting swung silently outward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark, square void in the wall. It was a safe, a massive black, cast-iron safe, with a single, complex brass dial. It looked 100 years old. You must, he said. Memorize this. I will not write it down. 28, 10, 91. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the dial. 28 to the left, 10 to the right, 91 to the left. I fumbled it twice. On the third try, I heard the heavy thunk of tumblers falling into place. I pulled the heavy, brass handle, and the door swung open with a groan of well-oiled hinges. I peered inside, expecting to see, what, stacks of gold bars, piles of cash, jewels? It was as anticlimactic as the binders. The safe was deep, and it was filled with more files, thick, accordion-style folders, a series of hard drives, all neatly labeled, a small velvet bag that might have held coins, and sitting on top of it all, a single, thick, cream-colored envelope, 9 inches by 12, sealed with a dark red wax stamp. Bring me the envelope first, he said. I pulled it out. It was heavy, the paper thick and expensive. The wax seal was imprinted with the same QW logo from the front gate. Quinwood. I carried it back to the desk, holding it with 2 hands, as if it were a bomb. He did not take it from me. It is for you, he said. Open it. But it's sealed. It is my last will and testament, he said, his voice perfectly level. Notarized, filed with my attorneys, and it is addressed to you. Open it. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal, the dried wax crumbling onto the desk. I pulled out the document. It was thick, 20 pages at least, bound with a blue ribbon. The first page was a dense block of legalese, but my eyes found the words, I, Walter Elias Fox, being of sound mind and body. I skipped down. Do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, real and personal, including all shares of Quinwood Holdings, LLC, all properties held in trust, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the contents therein. My eyes scanned, searching for the name. To my sole and beloved granddaughter, Reagan Ann Fox, to be hers unconditionally. I looked up, my vision blurring. Grandpa? Keep reading, he said. I turned the page. It was a schedule of assets, a list. It wasn't in dollars. It was just a list of things. Quinwood Estates, Colorado, 88 acres. Quinwood Mill, Oregon, 140 acres. Quinwood Fabrication Plant, Wyoming, Warehouse Portfolio, Utah, Commercial Properties, Downtown Denver, Investment Portfolio, Morgan Stanley, Investment Portfolio, Credit Suisse. It went on, for pages. At the very end, on the last page, there was an addendum, a single, typed line, estimated total net worth as of 1st of January, $1 billion, I whispered. The words felt like stones in my mouth. It was not a real number. It was an abstraction. A week ago, I was agonizing over a $40 a week paycheck from a bar. Now I was holding a piece of paper that represented more money than I could comprehend. My world, which had been tilting, now spun completely off its axis. This is a joke, I said, dropping the document on the desk as if it had burned me. This can't be real. It is real, he said, his voice firm. And it is not a gift. It is a responsibility. That money, Reagan, is the result of 50 years of labor, my men's labor. It is not the result of theft. And I will be damned, he said, his hand striking the wooden arm of his chair, if I let it fall back into the hands of the two people who chose money over family, who chose greed over honor. I was hyperventilating. I sat down, my head in my hands, $1 billion. What do I do with this? Nothing, he said sharply. Not yet. That is the least important thing I am giving you today. Go back to the safe. I was numb. I walked back to the open safe. What am I getting? Everything else. I reached in and pulled out the rest. 2 thick accordion files, heavier than the binders, the half-dozen hard drives, the small velvet bag. I piled it all on the desk. It looked like the contents of an accountant's office. He pointed to the first, thickest file. The binders I showed you, he said, were about the past. They are the story of how Quinwood was stolen. This is about the present. This is about Ever Harbor living. I froze. My job, my galas, my parents. My people were not just building furniture, he said, his voice turning to ice. When you work inside a company for that long, you see things, you hear things, and the men and women loyal to me, they are very, very thorough. I opened the file. It was not like the binders. This was not old. The documents were recent. I saw spreadsheets, printed out internal emails, scanned invoices. This, he said, is the real Ever Harbor, not the compassionate brand your mother built. My hands were shaking. I pulled out a spreadsheet. It was a list of residents at the flagship Denver facility, my facility, and next to their names were columns: base rate, level 1 ancillary, level 2, premium cognitive. And then I saw a name I knew. Mrs. Petrov, I whispered. I had planned her 100th birthday party just 6 months ago. She was a sweet, funny woman from Russia who always kissed my hand. I saw her invoice. Premium hydration services at $500 a month. Special cognitive monitoring at $800 a month. Wound prevention therapy at $1,000 a month. Mrs. Petrov. She didn't have wounds, I said, my voice shaking. She was in perfect health. And what is premium hydration? It is a nurse's aide bringing her a glass of water with a vitamin in it, he said, his voice full of acid. And cognitive monitoring is a checklist a security guard fills out. It's fraud, all of it. They are systematically overcharging, upselling, and in some cases, inventing services for the most vulnerable residents, the ones, like Mrs. Petrov, who have no family left to check the bills. I felt the nausea from before, but this time it was real. I ran to the ornate trash can by the desk and retched, bringing up the toast and coffee from that morning. He waited. He said nothing. I wiped my mouth, trembling. I organized her party. I hired the string quartet. I was part of this. You were the window dressing, he said, not unkindly. The beautiful, compassionate face that distracted the families. While your father and his accountants bled them dry, you were the lie. He pushed the hard drives across the desk. Copies of their servers, every email, every accounting file, for 10 years, and in that velvet bag, USB drives, they contain audio files. Your father is a very thorough man. He likes to record his negotiations with families who complain. My blood ran cold. I am not, he said, telling you to destroy your parents. I looked up, my eyes blurred with tears of shock and shame. Then, what are you telling me to do? He leaned forward, his old, powerful hands gripping the edge of the desk. I am giving you a choice. I am giving you the power, right now, in this room. You hold their entire lives in your hands. You hold their past, and you hold their present. He pointed to the binders. That can be buried, a family dispute. It would be my word against theirs. A he said, she said from 20 years ago. Then he pointed to the files I had just taken from the safe. But that is a crime. That is wire fraud. That is elder abuse. That is racketeering. That is a federal case that would not just destroy them, it would end them. It would send your father, and possibly your mother, to prison for the rest of their natural lives. The choice is yours, he said. You can take your $1 billion. You can bury all of this. You can let them continue, or you can take it to the authorities. You can let justice, for once, have its say. You are the head of this family now. Reagan, you have to decide what that means. I sat there, crushed under the weight of it all. My parents, my monstrous, cruel, thieving parents. They had raised me. They had fed me. They had paid for my college. I had memories. I had good memories. Christmas mornings, before the galas, when I was little, summer vacations, my father teaching me to ride a bike, his hand steady on the seat. And then I saw the other image, his hand, no longer steady, but raised, the crack of it against my cheek, his voice screaming at me to get out, my mother, watching, her face like ice. My grandfather, who had taught me what honor meant, and my parents, who had taught me what it cost. I was standing in the chasm between two worlds. That night, I did not sleep. They gave me a bedroom, a suite, really, larger than my entire Aurora apartment, with a fireplace and a bed that felt like a cloud. I did not get in it. I walked the silent, dark, moonlit halls of Quinwood Estates. I looked at the portraits, not the factory photos, but the old oil paintings of ancestors I had never known existed. I thought about my life, the girl who organized parties, the girl who smiled for her mother's brand, the girl who scrubbed toilets to protect the only decent person she knew. I stopped in front of a window. The snow had stopped, and the stars were brilliant in the mountain sky. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. I found the number in my contacts. Noah Ramirez, my best friend from college, the one I had lost touch with, mostly because I was too busy, and too ashamed of my family's perfect, empty life. I knew, vaguely, what he did. I pressed the call. It was 2 a.m. He picked up on the 4th ring. Reagan? His voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert. Reagan Fox? Is everything okay? Hey, Noah, I said, my voice a low whisper. Yeah, sorry to call so late. I have a hypothetical question. A hypothetical at 2 a.m? I could hear him sitting up, rubbing his face. Okay, shoot. This about your parents? He always had been able to read me. Hypothetically, I said, my voice tight. What if a company, a big, successful, reputable company, was, say, systematically defrauding its clients, but the clients, they were all elderly, like in nursing homes? There was a long silence on the other end. Go on, he said. His voice was no longer sleepy, it was sharp. What if, I continued, this company was charging for services it never provided? What if it was adding fake fees, thousands of dollars, to the bills of people who didn't have any family to check the numbers? And what if the CEO and the CFO knew all about it? If it was hypothetical, Reagan, he said slowly, I'd say that company is engaged in systemic wire fraud, mail fraud, and a violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's the kind of case that the FBI's Financial Crimes Division builds careers on. I closed my eyes. Federal. I'd been right. Noah, I said, and the hypothetical word was gone. What if this company was Ever Harbor Living? What if I had proof? What if I had internal accounting, emails, and recordings? Another, much longer silence. I heard him take a deep breath. Reagan, where are you? I'm safe. I'm not in Denver. If, he said, and his voice was cold, professional, and terrifying. If what you are saying is true, if you have what you say you have, this is not a family dispute. This is not a lawsuit. This is a major federal crime. This is a shut it all down, seize the assets, and send people to prison for a very, very long time kind of case. My hand tightened on the phone. Thank you, Noah. That's what I needed to know. Reagan, wait. I hung up. I stood there in the dark. The choice he had given me, it wasn't a choice at all. It was not about my revenge. It was not about my slap. It was about Mrs. Petrov. It was about all the other Mrs. Petrovs, all the other elderly, trusting people who my parents were robbing, all while I hired string quartets to play in their lobbies. I walked back to the study. The fire had died to embers. My grandfather was asleep in his wheelchair, his head resting on his chest, the old wool blanket over his knees. I put the thick files, the binders, the hard drives, and the new billion-dollar will all in a neat pile on the massive desk. I looked at his sleeping, peaceful face. I'm going to see them, I whispered to the sleeping old man. I'm going to go back. One last time. I will give them one chance to apologize to you, one chance to tell the truth. I touched the cold, hard plastic of the hard drives. And if they choose money again, if they choose the lie, one more time, then the rest of it will not be a family matter. The next day, I showered in a bathroom lined with Italian marble. Mrs. Albright had provided me with a simple, dark green wool dress from her own quarters. As my jeans were not appropriate, Miss Reagan, I put on my old, scuffed sneakers. They looked ridiculous with the elegant dress, but they were the only shoes I had. I did not take my old, rusty sedan. Mr. Hemlock informed me that a black SUV from the Quinwood Motor Pool was at my disposal. It was warm, clean, and smelled of new leather. I was given a black leather briefcase from my grandfather's study. Inside, I placed a curated selection of documents. The first binder, a few sample pages of the Ever Harbor invoices, and one of the small digital audio recorders from the safe. The drive back to Denver was a surreal journey, like traveling between two dimensions. I left the old silent world of Quinwood and descended back into the sharp, modern, glass and steel city my father claimed to own. I drove back to the house, my parents' house, the one I had been thrown out of. As I pulled the pristine, unmarked SUV into the curved driveway, I felt a tremor of fear, a conditioned reflex. My cheek instinctively throbbed, remembering the slap, but I pushed the feeling down. I was not the same girl who had left. I walked up the stone pathway, the briefcase feeling heavy in my hand. It was a return to a crime scene, but I was no longer the victim. I rang the bell. After a long pause, the door was opened by Maria, one of the housekeepers. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. She looked frightened. Miss Reagan, she stammered, her hands twisting in her apron. You are here. Hello, Maria, I said, my voice calm. I am here to see my parents. They are expecting me. I had called from the car. A short, curt call to my mother's cell phone. I am coming over. We need to talk. Now. Maria stepped back, her eyes darting nervously down the hall, as if she was afraid of being seen with me, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Yes, miss, they are in the living room. Some of the staff, the ones who had been there that Christmas night, peeked from the kitchen. One, a young woman I had hired to help with the gala, gave me a small, terrified smile and a tiny, almost imperceptible wave. Others just looked down, afraid of the impending explosion. The air in the house was thick with tension, with the unspoken instability of a regime in crisis. I walked down the grand hall, my sneakers silent on the marble. I passed the spot where the 20-foot Christmas tree had stood. It was gone, of course. The room felt naked and cold without it. I entered the living room, the room of the slap. They were there, waiting, sitting not on the comfortable sofas, but on the two stiff, formal armchairs they used for important guests, Gregory Fox and Elise Fox. They did not stand up. They did not hug me. They did not ask if I was okay, where I had been, if I was hungry or cold. They stared at me with a mixture of calculation and wary anger. My father's face was a mask of impatience. My mother's was arranged in a look of pained, practiced disappointment. They had clearly rehearsed this. They expected me to be here on my knees, begging. They thought I had come back, homeless, penniless, to apologize. They thought the real world had broken me in a few weeks and I was crawling back, ready to be their obedient, blue-collar daughter again. "Reagan," my father said, his voice a low, warning rumble. He gestured to a small, hard chair opposite them. "Sit." I did not sit. I walked to the heavy glass coffee table between us, the same table his wineglass had shattered against. I placed the black leather briefcase on it, the sound of the leather on the glass a soft, definitive thud. "I am not here to sit," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the high-ceilinged room. "And I am not here to beg." My father's eyebrows shot up. My mother's mask of disappointment flickered with genuine surprise. "I am here," I continued, "to give you one final chance." My father let out a short, bark-like laugh. "A chance? You, who embarrassed me in front of my partners, who ran off with a senile old man. You are giving us a chance?" "Yes," I said. I undid the 2 brass clasps on the briefcase. Click, click. The sounds were as loud as gunshots in the quiet room. I spoke with Grandpa." My mother's composure cracked. She sat forward, a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes. "Oh, Reagan. Honey, no. You can't listen to him. He's not well. He's been confused for years." "He doesn't seem confused, Mom," I said. "In fact, he seems incredibly lucid. He told me everything. He told me about Quinwood Industries. He told me about how it was stolen." My father's face went from dismissive to a dark, dangerous purple. "That is a lie, an exaggeration. That is the fantasy of a bitter, failed old man who couldn't hack it in the modern world." "That's what I thought, too," I said. I opened the briefcase. "But he has keepsakes. He's a very meticulous man." I took out the first binder, the one with my mother's signature. I opened it and placed it on the glass table, turning it to face them. "He told me about the recession," I said, my finger tracing a line on the plastic-sleeved page, "and how, while he was trying to save the company, you, Dad, were funneling client lists to new investors, and you, Mom, you were bleeding the company dry." My mother's face went white. She stared at the page. She saw her own signature, looped and perfect, next to a wire transfer for $250,000 to a shell company in Delaware. "This is," my father began, his voice a strangled roar. "This is privileged. This is a wire transfer, dated October of 1998, I said, my voice as cold as ice. "Authorized by Elise Fox, for PR and marketing services, to a company, let's see, Apex Development Group, a company, which after a little digging, I found was registered to an address in Wilmington that was just a post office box, a box that was, in turn, leased by your new investors." I turned the page. "And here's another, and another, and another, all signed by you. Mom, $5 million, in 6 months, stolen, from the company you were working for, from your own father-in-law." Elise Fox was no longer the queen of society. She was a pale, terrified woman. She reached out a trembling hand. Reagan, you don't understand. This is just family. It was all so long ago. It was a different time. Your father, we were just trying to build something. For you. For the family." She switched tactics. The denial had failed. Now came the emotional manipulation. "The best thing to do," she said, her voice a wet, pleading whisper, "is to just put this away, burn it. This is our private history. It's for the family. We don't need to show this to anyone. We can keep this safe. We can keep our dignity." "Dignity," I repeated. The word felt disgusting. My father, Gregory, stood up. He was not pleading. He was done with that. He moved into the final, predictable phase: intimidation. "You think you are clever," he spat, his face inches from mine. "You come in here with your stolen, old documents. You think you can blackmail us? Your own parents?" He pointed a thick finger at my face. "You listen to me. If one page of that," he gestured to the binder, "ever sees the light of day, I will destroy you. I will use every dollar I have. I will use my entire legal team. I will use every media contact your mother has cultivated for 30 years. I will paint you," he hissed, "as a greedy, ungrateful, unstable daughter, a girl who was manipulated by a senile, bitter old man into trying to steal the family fortune. I will tell the world you are a liar, that you are mentally ill. I will have you declared incompetent. No one will ever believe you. They will see me, the man who built this city's finest institutions, and they will see you, a girl who can't even hold a job." I just looked at him. I did not flinch. I did not move. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. My calmness seemed to enrage him more. He was about to speak, but I held up a hand. "And just so we're clear," I said, my voice remaining perfectly even, "I am, in fact, recording this entire conversation." I reached into the inner pocket of my coat, not the briefcase, my coat, and I pulled out the small, silver digital recorder. The red light was on. It had been on since I stepped out of the SUV. Elise let out a sound, a high-pitched, strangled gasp. My father looked at the recorder. He looked at my face, and for the first time, I saw it. Genuine, cold, calculating fear. He finally understood that he was not in control. "You," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You, bitch." "So, that's the past," I said, ignoring him. "That's the theft of Quinwood. That's just a family matter, as Mom would say. But then, there's the other file." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the second folder, the one with Mrs. Petrov's name. "Then," I said, "there's Ever Harbor Living." I threw the spreadsheet on the table. "You lied, you threatened, and you tried to manipulate me. But this is what it's all about. Not the old theft, the new one, the one that's happening right now. Premium hydration services, Dad? Cognitive monitoring? For a woman who was 100 years old and sharp as a tack? You're robbing them. You're robbing all of them. Old, vulnerable, sick people, people who trust you." My father was silent. He was looking at the recorder. He was finally desperately trying to calculate the damage. But my mother, she had no such control. The sight of the Ever Harbor documents, her current brand, her life's work, that's what broke her. "You think this is easy?" she suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking, the polished veneer shattering into 1,000 pieces. "You think it's easy to build what we built? Those people, they have no one. They're grateful. You think they even know what they're signing? Who is going to sue? Their children, who haven't visited them in 5 years. They have no one to complain to. You are overthinking this, Reagan. You are ruining everything." The room fell silent. She had said it. She had admitted it. They have no one to complain to. I looked at her. I looked at my father, who had his head in his hands, not in shame, but in fury at her mistake. I looked at them, the two people who had raised me, and I felt nothing, just a vast, cold, empty finality, the last ember of hope, the tiny, stupid, childish wish that this was all a misunderstanding, was finally extinguished. I calmly reached out and pressed the stop button on the recorder. I slipped it back into my pocket. I stood up. "I came here," I said, my voice quiet, "to give you a chance to apologize to Grandpa, to me, to someone. I came here to see if there was anything, even a shred, of the people I thought you were. If you had shown 1 ounce of remorse, 1 hint of shame." I looked at my mother, who was now openly weeping, her makeup running. I looked at my father, who was staring at me with a look of such pure, undiluted hatred it was almost purifying. "You chose not to," I said. You chose the money. You chose the lie. Again. I closed the briefcase, with the old binders still inside, the Ever Harbor file. I left on the table. From this second forward, I said, this is no longer in my hands. My father snapped. The calculation was over. Pure, primal rage took over. He lunged, not at the briefcase, at me. He lunged, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of fury, roaring my name. I stepped back. I did not raise my hands. I did not scream. I just moved out of his reach. My old sneakers gripping the marble his expensive shoes slipped on. He stumbled, catching himself on the glass table. You slapped me once, Dad, I said, my voice cold and steady. You slapped me because I stood with him. You will not touch me again. I turned my back on him, on both of them. Get out, he screamed at my back. The same words from Christmas Eve. Get out. Reagan, no. Wait, please, my mother wailed, her voice a pathetic cry. Don't do this. We're family. We're your family. I walked through the grand hall. I did not run. I walked, my footsteps even and measured. I walked past the nervous, watching staff. I walked past the spot where my life had shattered. I walked to the massive, carved front door. I pulled it open, and this time, the cold winter air felt clean. It felt like freedom. I walked out of the house I had grown up in, the house built on lies. I walked past the glittering, empty windows, and I did not look back. I understood, with absolute, chilling clarity, that the thing called my family had, in fact, just ended. It was over. The drive back up the mountain to Quinwood Estates was silent. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just felt a profound, cold emptiness, the feeling of a limb that has been cleanly amputated. I had done the thing I had to do, and now the anesthesia of shock was wearing off, leaving only the clean, sharp pain of the wound. I returned the black SUV to the motor pool. I walked into the great house. Mr. Hemlock met me at the door, his face a mask of professional calm. Mr. Fox is in the study, Miss Reagan, he said quietly. I found my grandfather exactly where I had left him, by the window, a blanket over his knees. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered forest in hues of pink and gray. It is done, I said from the doorway. He didn't turn. He just looked out at the mountains. Did they... No, I said. They did not apologize. They chose the lie. He closed his eyes, a single, slow nod. Then you will do what you must. The next morning, I did not call Noah Ramirez from my personal cell phone. Mr. Hemlock provided me with a secure satellite phone from my grandfather's desk. The lines at the house may be compromised. Miss Reagan, your father is a thorough man. My call was brief. Noah, it's Reagan. I have everything. It is so much worse than I told you. His voice was all business. Do not call me again from this number. Do not use your own phone. Do not go to your apartment. A car will be at the end of your driveway in 1 hour. It will be a gray sedan. The driver will not know your name. He will ask you if you are going downtown. You will say, yes. Do you understand? Yes. Bring everything, Reagan, and bring yourself. From this moment on, you are in the system. Be safe. I packed the binders, the files, the hard drives, the audio recorders. I packed them all into a heavy-duty duffel bag. Mrs. Albright gave me a heavy, dark coat and a pair of sturdy boots that were, thankfully, my size. Be careful, child, she said, her hands on my shoulders. You are doing the right thing, but the right thing is rarely easy. I met the car at the end of the long, stone-paved drive, just outside the massive iron gates. I got in. The driver did not look at me. The 1-hour drive was silent. He did not take me to a police station. He took me to the loading dock of the Alfred A. Araj United States Courthouse in downtown Denver. We went in through a metal door, through a series of gray concrete hallways, and up a freight elevator. We emerged into a clean, sterile, windowless hallway. Noah was there. He was not my college friend. He was not the laughing, easygoing guy I remembered. He was dressed in a crisp, dark suit, his face grim, his eyes assessing. With him were two other people, a man and a woman, who looked even more severe. "Reagan," he said, no emotion in his voice. "This is Special Agent Kincaid, and this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Sharon Mills." They nodded. They did not shake my hand. "This way," Noah said. He led me into a small, beige conference room, the kind of room with no personality, designed to make you forget the time of day. The table was cheap laminate, but the electronics on it were not. "First," Noah said, "we need your phone and any other electronics you have." I handed it over. He dropped it into a silver-lined evidence bag and sealed it. "From this moment, Reagan," he said, and his voice was cold, formal. "You are a key witness in a potential federal investigation. I am no longer your friend. I am your handler. Do you understand that? Anything you say in this room is on the record. It is being recorded. It will be scrutinized, verified, and used. There is no off the record. There is no hypothetical. Do you consent to proceed?" I looked at the three of them, their faces impassive. This was it, the final door. "I consent," I said. For the next 8 hours, I talked. I told them everything. I started with Christmas Eve, the slap, the words "useless old man." I told them about my apartment in Aurora, about the bar jobs, about scrubbing toilets at the Ever Harbor facility, and then I opened the duffel bag. I laid it all out, the binders on the theft of Quinwood, the hard drives, the spreadsheets, the invoices, and finally, the 2 digital recorders. "This one," I said, my voice shaking, "is from my grandfather's safe. He recorded his enemies. And this one is from me, from yesterday." I watched as the AUSA, Ms. Mills, put on a pair of headphones. Noah plugged in the recorder from my confrontation with my parents. I watched her face. It did not change. She was a statue, but her knuckles, where she gripped her pen, turned white. She listened to the whole thing, to my mother's pleading, to my father's threats, and finally, to my mother's shrieked, final confession. They have no one to complain to. She took off the headphones and placed them on the table. She looked at Noah. She looked at me. "Agent Ramirez," she said, her voice a flat, hard instrument. "Get the warrants. Get all of them. Get the warrants for the house, for the headquarters, for their personal bank accounts. Get it all." The next 72 hours were a blur. I was not allowed to leave. I was kept in a secure, windowless room in the federal building, what they called a witness protection suite. I slept on a hard cot. I ate food from the cafeteria. Noah and Ms. Mills questioned me relentlessly. They started with the past, the Quinwood theft. "We need to establish a pattern," Ms. Mills explained, her voice devoid of sympathy. "We need to show a jury that this was not a one-time mistake. We need to show that this is who Gregory Fox is, that this is a pattern of predatory behavior." Then they moved to Ever Harbor. They brought in forensic accountants, elderly care specialists. They tore through the hard drives. They projected my father's spreadsheets on the wall. My event planning skills, my intimate knowledge of the company's structure, were suddenly their most valuable asset. "This charge," an accountant said, pointing to a line item, "ELG hospitality surcharge. What is it?" "It's nothing," I said. "It's a fake fee. My father added it 5 years ago. It goes straight to a holding company. I used to organize the budgets. I was told it was for brand management." "It is $30 million a year, Ms. Fox," the accountant said, "of pure, unadulterated fraud." The questions became harder, more personal. Ms. Mills sat across from me, her eyes drilling into me. "Let's talk about the galas. Ms. Fox, the Ever Harbor Foundation for Dignified Aging. You ran this, correct?" "Yes, I planned the fundraisers." "The galas where you raised millions of dollars. The ones where you put on those beautiful videos of smiling residents. The ones you hosted at the Denver Art Museum, the ones where you invited the governor, the state senators.
Yes.
Did you know, she said, her voice like silk and steel, that while you were serving champagne and lobster to donors, Mrs. Petrov, in that same facility, was being billed $1,000 for wound care she didn't need? Did you realize that your entire job, your galas, your fundraisers, your glossy press releases, were the most effective weapon in their arsenal? That you were the beautiful, smiling face that let them get away with all of it? I put my head in my hands. I suspected. No, I didn't. I didn't want to. I was naive. I was stupid. I was a part of it. I was a tool.
Yes, Ms. Fox, she said, no pity in her voice. You were, and that is exactly what you are going to tell the grand jury.
While I was being debriefed, the machine was moving. On the third day, Noah came into the room. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were bright. He turned on the small television in the corner of the room.
It's time, he said.
The local news was on, and there it was, a helicopter shot, a long line of dark, official cars, blue and red flashing lights. They were streaming up the long, manicured driveway of the Ever Harbor Living corporate headquarters. I watched, my heart in my throat, as agents from the FBI and the state police, wearing vests, poured out of the vehicles. They swarmed the front door of the glass and steel building. The broadcast cut to a reporter, standing on the grass, wind whipping her hair. We have breaking news, an unprecedented raid. Sources say this is a multi-agency federal investigation. FBI, IRS criminal investigation, focused on Ever Harbor Living Group. They cut to another feed, my parents' house, the house I had just left. The same dark cars were pulling up the curved driveway. Agents were at the front door. And then, the image that will be burned into my mind forever. The evening news, 6 o'clock, the lead story. They showed the raid. They showed agents carrying boxes of files, rolling out server racks. And then they showed him, my father, Gregory Fox. He was being led out of the headquarters. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His expensive, tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie askew. His face was not angry. It was not arrogant. It was just empty. The face of a king who had just watched his entire kingdom burn. Then, my mother, they led her out of the house. She was wearing a pair of oversized, dark sunglasses, the kind she wore to society lunches. She was holding her purse, but one hand was cuffed to the wrist of a female agent. She tried to hide her face, to turn away, but the cameras were relentless. They caught her. Her mouth, below the glasses, was a grimace of pure, animal terror. The news anchor's voice was sober. The company, founded by Gregory Fox, has long used the slogan, compassionate care for the family. Tonight, that slogan is being called into question as federal agents allege a massive, decade-long conspiracy to defraud. They replayed the old commercials, the ones I had helped produce. My father, smiling, patting an old man on the shoulder. My mother, cutting a ribbon, her face beaming with fake warmth. And then they would cut back to the image of them in handcuffs. The story exploded. The media dug. They went back. They found old, disgruntled Quinwood employees, the ones who had been fired when my father took over. They were all over the news, their faces wrinkled, but their memories sharp. Oh, no, Gregory wasn't the brains, one old foreman said, his face on camera. His daddy, Walter, he was the genius. Walter was the real one, the kind one. Gregory? He was just loud. My phone, which was now in an evidence locker, was blowing up. My old number. Reporters were everywhere. They were camped outside my Aurora apartment. They were trying to find me. Daughter brings down father's empire. The fox who hunted the fox. Reagan's revenge. I was hounded. My grandfather's lawyers. A team of discreet, silent men in dark suits. issued a single statement on my behalf. This is not a television show. This is not a family drama. This is a criminal case about the protection of the vulnerable. Miss Fox will be making no further comment. I was finally moved from the federal building, not to my apartment, not to Quinwood, to a secure, undisclosed hotel. From there, I was allowed one monitored call. I called the satellite phone at the estate. Mrs. Albright answered. Miss Reagan? Let me speak to him. He came on the line, his voice thin. Reagan, I am watching the news. I saw it, Grandpa. I saw it. He was quiet for a long time. I heard him take a shaky breath. I have waited 20 years, he whispered. For the truth to be told, I have waited for my name to be cleared. I am relieved, he paused. But, Reagan, I cannot find it in my heart to be happy. I cannot celebrate, seeing my own son in handcuffs, my boy. The pain in his voice was real. His victory was ashes. His justice was just loss. I know, Grandpa, I whispered. I know. The next day, a courier arrived. He was a federal marshal. He handed me a single, white envelope. It was not a request. It was an order. It was a subpoena, a summons to appear before the grand jury of the United States District Court for the District of Colorado. I held the paper in my hand. It was thin, but it felt heavier than all the binders, all the gold, all the money in the world. My hand was trembling, but not from fear, from finality. This was the last step, the one that would define my life, the one I could never, ever come back from. I was no longer just Reagan Fox, the event planner. I was Reagan Fox, the witness. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of my life spent inside the cold, gray federal courthouse. The grand jury had indicted them on 47 counts, ranging from wire fraud and conspiracy to mail fraud, racketeering, and elder abuse. The case, the United States of America v. Gregory Fox and Elise Fox, had become a media circus. On the first day, I had to walk through a gauntlet of cameras. People shouted my name. Reagan! Reagan! Is it true you did this? Why did you betray your parents? I kept my eyes forward, my face a mask. My grandfather's lawyers had assigned me my own security. 2 large, quiet men who flanked me, pushing through the crowd. I wore the same thing every day. A simple black wool dress, flat shoes, my hair pulled back. I was not there to be a character. I was there to be a witness. The courtroom, Courtroom C, was the largest in the building, and it was packed. The first 2 rows were a sea of reporters, their pens scratching furiously in notebooks. Behind them were the families, the children and grandchildren of the residents of Ever Harbor. I saw the son of Mrs. Petrov, an elderly man himself, clutching a photograph of his mother. I saw former employees, the nurses, the accountants, the custodians, the woman whose cleaning shift I had almost taken. They were all there, a silent, expectant audience. And then there were my parents. They were seated at the defense table, flanked by a team of the most expensive lawyers in Denver, but the money could not buy back their aura. My father, Gregory, had lost weight. His expensive suit hung on him. His silver hair looked dull, and his face was a pale, grayish color. He stared straight ahead, a mask of defiant arrogance, but his hand, the one not taking notes, was trembling, a constant, furious tremor. My mother, Elise, was a ruin. She, who had never been seen in public without a perfect face, was sallow. She wore a simple beige suit, as if trying to look mousy, to look invisible. Her eyes were red-rimmed and darted constantly, from the jury, to the judge, to the door, as if looking for an escape. She looked old. She looked, for the first time in her life, exactly her age. The prosecutor, AUSA Mills, was not theatrical. She was a butcher. She was calm, methodical, and she laid out the case in a flat, brutal monotone. This is a case about 2 things, she said, addressing the jury. Greed and betrayal. It is about a son who betrayed his father, stealing his company, his life's work. And when that wasn't enough, it is about a husband and wife who built a new empire, an empire of compassionate care, by betraying the most vulnerable people in our society, the elderly, the sick, the lonely. She told the whole story, the theft of Quinwood, the accident, the leveraging of the stolen assets, and then the system, the systematic, cynical, cold-blooded fraud of Ever Harbor. They did not just steal money, Mills said, her voice rising for the first time. They stole dignity, they stole trust, and they did it all while hiding behind $1 million marketing campaign of family values. Today, that family's value is on trial. The witnesses came, one after another, a parade of quiet devastation. The accountant from Ever Harbor, a mousy man with thick glasses, broke down on the stand. He pointed at my father. Mr. Fox, he called it the sucker tax, he said. He said the children who didn't visit were the best customers. He told us to maximize the ancillary fees for anyone over 85 with a lapsed power of attorney. We had quotas. We had to hit a 30% ancillary margin on every resident. A nurse, her voice trembling with rage, told her story. They made us charge for wound prevention therapy. Do you know what that was? It was me. Rubbing a 20-cent lotion on a resident's heels for 30 seconds, and they billed the families $1,000 a month. When I complained, when I said this was wrong, I was told by Mrs. Pamela Fox that I should focus on the brand and stop being difficult. The son of Mrs. Petrov took the stand. He held up the invoice. My mother, she was a wonderful woman. She trusted them. I trusted them. And they charged her $500 a month for premium hydration. She died, and when I got the final bill, I saw this. I buried my mother, and I had to pay $500 for a glass of water. Finally, my name was called. The prosecution calls Reagan Ann Fox. The room went silent. The sound of 100 pens scratching stopped. I felt the weight of every eye in the room. I walked to the stand. I did not look at my parents. I kept my eyes on the judge, and then on Ms. Mills. I swore the oath. For 2 days, she walked me through it. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of emotion. I was a human document. I told them about Christmas Eve. He raised his hand, and he slapped me across the face. What did your father yell? He yelled, he said, "You want to protect that useless old man? Then get out. Get out of my house. Take him with you, and don't ever come back." And your mother, Elise Fox, what did she do? She did nothing. She stood next to him. She took his arm. I told them about the apartment, the bar jobs, the cleaning job. You were the daughter of the CEO, and you were scrubbing toilets in one of his facilities? Yes, I needed the money to pay for my grandfather's medicine. I told them about Quinwood Estates, the drive up, the iron gate, the shock. I told them about the study, the binders, the safe, the will. And what was in the second file? Miss Fox? The one from the safe? It was the evidence of the fraud at Ever Harbor. I told them about the final confrontation, my father's threats, my mother's confession. And then, it was the defense's turn. My father's lead attorney, a man with a silver mane and $1,000 suit, approached me like a snake. He was all smooth, fatherly charm. Miss Fox, Reagan, this must be terribly difficult for you. It is. Your parents, they gave you everything, did they not? A fine education, a good job, a beautiful home. Yes. And yet, you were not given a leadership role in the company, were you? You were an event planner. Yes. Were you jealous, Miss Fox? Were you angry that your father didn't just give you the company? No, I was not. Isn't it true, Miss Fox, he boomed, that you were, in fact, deeply in debt from your own mismanagement? That you were furious? And that your grandfather, this secret billionaire, saw an opportunity? That he manipulated you? That he offered you $1 billion to betray your own parents? Ms. Mills stood. Objection, badgering, speculation. Sustained, the judge said. The lawyer smiled. The seed was planted. He turned back. So, you are not the sole heir to your grandfather's $1 billion estate? I am. And you are not testifying against your parents in order to secure that inheritance? No, I said, and my voice, for the first time, was not flat, it was cold. I am testifying because what they did was wrong. I am testifying for Mrs. Petrov. I am testifying for the people they called suckers. I am testifying because they are criminals. The lawyer's smile vanished. No further questions. My father's testimony was a masterpiece of arrogance. He was Gregory Fox. He was the visionary. Yes, he had restructured Quinwood. It was a business necessity. His father didn't understand the modern market. He had saved the company from his father's incompetence. He did not address the theft, the fraud, the binders. He just ignored them. He blamed the recession. He blamed overzealous employees. He blamed the pressure of being a CEO. He never, not once, looked at me. And my mother, Elise, she played her final, greatest role, the victim. She wept. She dabbed her eyes. She was just a wife. She didn't understand the numbers. She just trusted her husband. She did what he told her. She was just trying to be a good partner. She was under so much pressure to maintain the brand. I loved our residents, she sobbed. I would never do anything to hurt them. And then, Ms. Mills stood up for her cross-examination. No more questions. Mrs. Fox, I just have one more thing for the court to hear. She signaled to the tech. I would like to play an audio recording from the defendant's own home, a conversation between Mrs. Fox and the witness, Reagan Fox. My mother's head snapped up. Her face, which had been a mask of tearful innocence, went pale. She knew. And Ms. Mills played it, for the whole court, for the jury, for the reporters, for the families. My voice, cold. You're robbing them. Old, vulnerable, sick people. And then, my mother's. Not a sob, not a whisper, a shriek, a raw, ugly, reptilian screech, full of rage and terror. Those people, they have no one. They're grateful. You think they even know what they're signing? Who is going to sue? Their children, who haven't visited them in 5 years, they have no one to complain to. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was so loud it was almost a shout. My mother, Elise, she just deflated. She sank in her chair, her hands covering her face. Her performance was over. During the break, I stepped out into the hall for air. The silence of the court was replaced by the buzz of the reporters. I walked to a window at the far end, away from them. And I saw him, my grandfather. He was sitting in his wheelchair, Mrs. Albright beside him. He had not been in the courtroom. He had refused, but he had been here, waiting. I walked over to him. He looked up, his face etched with a pain so deep it was bottomless. You heard? I asked. I heard the recording, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I heard her. He looked through the thick glass window, at the city he had helped build. I do not regret the truth being told. Reagan, he said, his voice breaking. I only regret. I regret that it had to be told this way, in this place. The day of the sentencing, the courtroom was silent. No one whispered, no one coughed. It was the silence of an execution. The jury had taken less than 5 hours, guilty, on all major counts. The judge, a woman with a severe, kind face, looked at my parents. Mr. Fox, Mrs. Fox, please rise. They stood, trembling. The judge read from her papers. She spoke of the profound betrayal, the cynical exploitation of the most vulnerable, the disgusting use of a family's good name to perpetrate a generation of fraud. "Mr. Gregory Fox?" she said, her voice like iron. "On the counts of conspiracy, wire fraud, and racketeering, this court sentences you to 25 years in a federal prison." A sound, not a cry, a pop, a sound of all the air leaving my father's body. He staggered, and his lawyer had to grip his arm to hold him up. "Mrs. Elise Fox," the judge continued, "while you were a willing participant, the court believes you were, in part, acting under the direction of your husband. However, your actions, and your own words, show a deep and profound lack of moral character." She sentenced my mother to 5 years of probation, a $10 million fine, and the seizure of all personal assets related to the fraudulent income. The house was gone, the cars were gone, the art, the jewelry, the life, it was all gone. The marshals moved in. They stood behind my father. I watched, from the front row, as they instructed him to put his hands behind his back. I heard the click of the handcuffs. And as they locked, my father, Gregory Fox, finally turned. He turned and looked, not at his weeping wife, but at me. His face was not angry. It was not hateful. It was hollow. It was the empty, vacant stare of a man who had built his entire identity on a mountain of lies and had just watched it all of it, slide into the sea he had lost, and he knew it. My mother just crumpled, her head down, her shoulders shaking, refusing to look at anyone. I did not celebrate. I did not cheer. I did not feel victorious. I just felt the end, a heavy, sad, inevitable end. The man who had slapped me was gone. The woman who had watched was gone. And in their place were 2 convicted felons, 2 broken, old people. I had lost my parents, all over again, in a new and much more permanent way. I stood up. I turned my back on the courtroom. I walked out into the hall, the sound of my mother's sobbing fading behind me. I walked to my grandfather. I took the handles of his wheelchair. "Let's go home, Grandpa," I whispered. I pushed him out of the federal courthouse, through the same doors I had entered as a witness. The wind outside was cold, biting. It whipped my hair across my face. My grandfather looked up at the gray winter sky. He took a deep, shuddering breath of the free, cold air. He reached up, his thin, spotted hand finding mine on the handle of his chair. "At least," he whispered, his voice thick with tears he would not shed. "At least, all those families, all those old people, at least they know. Justice is not just for the rich." I looked at his hand on mine, and for the first time, I understood. This was never about my revenge. It was about his justice. A few weeks after the trial, the world was still loud. The Ever Harbor Living Group was in receivership, a corpse being picked apart by lawyers and creditors. My parents' assets were frozen, their mansions seized by the federal government. But at Quinwood Estates, there was only a profound, heavy silence. The will was read on a Tuesday morning. It was not in the grand study or the formal living room. We gathered in the main corporate boardroom, a room I had never seen, paneled in the same dark, rich wood that my grandfather loved. There were no reporters. There were no cameras. I had forbidden it. "This is a private matter," I had told the lawyers. "This is not a spectacle. This is not for them." The only people in attendance were the ones who had mattered. Mrs. Albright. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale but composed. Mr. Hemlock, standing stiffly by the door. A silent guardian. And the 3 old foremen, the men who had started with him in that freezing garage in Wyoming. They were in their 60s and 70s now, their faces carved with deep lines, their hands gnarled and powerful, and they all wore their best, slightly ill-fitting Sunday suits. My grandfather's lead attorney, a man I had come to know well, sat at the head of the long, polished table. My grandfather, Walter Fox, sat at the other end, in his wheelchair, his old brown sweater on, looking small and quiet against the backdrop of his own immense success. I sat to his right. The lawyer began to read. The language was dry, a sea of whereas and hereinafter and in witness whereof. He read through the minor bequests: lifetime pensions for Mrs. Albright and Mr. Hemlock, generous bonuses and shares for the 3 foremen, donations to the local carpenters' union. The foremen wept, openly. They were not quiet, dignified tears. They were the hacking, choked sobs of old men who had been given a final, profound gift of respect. Then, the lawyer cleared his throat. He reached the main article. And all the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, real and personal, tangible and intangible, wheresoever situated. He paused, and his eyes found mine. I give, devise, and bequeath to my sole and beloved granddaughter, Regan Ann Fox. The room was utterly, completely silent for 3 full seconds. The only sound was the lawyer shuffling his papers. And then the applause started. It was not the polite, brittle clapping of my old life. It was a roar. The 3 old carpenters were on their feet, their big, rough hands slamming together, their faces split in grins of pure, unadulterated joy. Mrs. Albright was crying into a handkerchief, but she was clapping. Mr. Hemlock, in a shocking breach of protocol, was visibly smiling, applauding firmly. They were not cheering for my new wealth. They were cheering for the end of the story. They were cheering because the right person had won. I felt a wave of heat rush to my face. I stood up, my knees shaking, and in that moment, I felt it, a terrifying, dizzying vertigo, the power, the $1 billion, the feeling of being the one at the center of the room, the one with all the control. I saw, in a flash, my father's face, his look of arrogant command. I felt, for 1 second, the terrifying, seductive pull of becoming him. I had to speak, now. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaking, but carrying. "Thank you all. I am not standing here to take my father's place. I am not taking over a throne." I looked at the faces of the men who had built this company twice. "I am standing here to make a promise to all of you, and to my grandfather. I am standing here to protect what he built, to ensure that the name Quinwood and the honor and the work it stands for will never, ever be sold cheap again. It will never be hollowed out. It will never be a lie." I looked at my grandfather. He was watching me, his eyes clear and sharp, and he gave me a single, slow nod. The test was over. I had passed. Later that evening, after the lawyers and the foreman had gone, the house was quiet again. I found my grandfather in the study, just sitting by the fire, which was now a low, glowing bed of embers. He seemed weaker now that the fight was over. The adrenaline of the past 2 decades, the thing that had kept him going, was finally, visibly, leaving him. I sat on the ottoman at his feet, just as I had as a little girl, before my mother had told me it was unladylike. He reached out his thin, spotted hand and laid it on my head. His touch was light as paper. "You spoke well today. Regan," he whispered. His voice was getting thin again, the authority fading back into age. "I meant it," I said. "I know." He was quiet for a long time. "Your father, he always thought revenge was about destruction, about winning, about making the other person lose. He was a fool." He looked into the dying fire. "I had my revenge, Regan," he whispered. "I had it 20 years ago, the moment I set up the new workshop in that garage. My revenge was living. It was working. It was building something better, something honest. Right under his nose. My revenge was proving him wrong. Every single day. Without him ever even knowing it. That was my victory." He turned his eyes to me, and they were so clear, so full of a tired, profound love. "Your part is not revenge. That is over. It is a hollow, empty meal. Your part is to take all of this money, this pain, This, this tragedy, and you must make it useful. And I knew, in that instant, exactly what I had to do. The idea had been forming since the day I had listened to the families in that courtroom. "I have an idea," I said. "A plan, for the money, for the Quinwood name." I told him, I proposed that we would use a significant portion of the company's annual profits, not to build new wings on museums, not to sponsor galas. "I want to start the Quinwood Foundation," I said, the words tasting right for the first time. "And its only purpose will be to provide free, world-class legal aid to the elderly, to the people who are being defrauded by their children, to the people being robbed blind by corporations like Ever Harbor. We will hire lawyers, the best lawyers, and we will set them loose. We will be the people that those families, the ones my mother said had no one to complain to, can call." He looked at me, his eyes shining in the firelight. He did not speak. He just smiled, a full, true, beautiful smile. He squeezed my hand. "That," he whispered. "Yes, that is useful." The next day, I wrote 2 letters. They were the hardest things I've ever written. The first was to Gregory Fox, mailed to the federal penitentiary, where he was now an inmate number. The second was to Elise Fox, mailed to the small 1-bedroom apartment in nondescript suburb that the court had allowed her to keep. They were not letters of anger. They were not letters of, "I told you so." They were not letters of revenge. They were letters of release. "I have chosen," I wrote to both of them, "to follow Grandpa's path, not yours. I will spend the rest of my life building on his legacy of honor, not on yours, I hope, one day, if you ever find the courage, that you will apologize to him, even if it is only in your own heart." I did not expect a reply. I never got one. And in that, I was finally, truly free, the last, thin, toxic thread of hatred that had bound me to them snapped. I did not need their apology. I did not need their remorse. I had my work. I had my grandfather. He lived for 3 more months. They were quiet. Good months. The house was no longer a secret fortress. It was a home. I spent every day with him. We no longer spoke of the trial, or of my parents. We spoke of wood, of the future, of the mountains. One afternoon, I pushed his wheelchair out to the dormant rose garden. It was a clear, cold day, and the sun on the snow was blinding. We sat there, together, looking out at the sharp, white peaks of the Rockies, the same peaks that had hidden his tiny garage, his new beginning. He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned his head and looked at me. "You know, Reagan," he said, his voice a faint, papery whisper. "All those news stories, they got it wrong. They kept calling me the secret billionaire. They thought that was the story." He reached out, his trembling fingers finding my hand. "I was never the secret," he whispered. You, my girl, you were the one who, when given the choice, wouldn't sell her soul for all the money in the world. You were the real treasure." He died that night. It was not a tragedy. It was a release. Mrs. Albright found him in the morning. He had passed in his sleep, in his own bed, in his own house, looking out the window at the forest. I had been there, sitting in the chair by his bed, and I had fallen asleep holding his hand. When I woke up, the sun was rising, and his hand in mine was cold. There was no grand funeral. There was no media. We held a simple memorial in the workshop, the new workshop, the one in Wyoming, filled with the smell of sawdust and varnish. It was not attended by politicians or CEOs. It was attended by hundreds of carpenters, by factory workers, by his old neighbors from that small town, by the families he had helped, by the men who had worked with him for 50 years. They came to say goodbye to Walter, to the kind carpenter, to the old boss. It was the richest funeral I have ever been to. 3 months after that, I stood in a new office. It was not in the grand Quinwood Tower. It was a storefront in a quiet neighborhood in Denver. The sign on the glass was simple: the Quinwood Foundation. Inside, it was clean, bright and full of energy. The walls were lined with desks, and at those desks sat 5 of the sharpest, hungriest, most idealistic young lawyers I could find. I was hanging the only picture that would ever matter in this office. I had found it in an old box. It was a simple photograph of my grandfather, from about 10 years ago. Long before he had come to live with us. He was in his workshop. He was wearing the old, faded brown wool sweater. He was in his wheelchair, and he was laughing, his head thrown back, his face full of life and joy. I hung it on the wall, in the center, where everyone could see it. Beneath it, I placed a small, simple brass plaque. I had written the words myself. Justice is not revenge, it is love with a backbone. I turned to my new team. They were watching me, waiting. Outside, the first of our new clients was walking up to the door, an elderly woman, clutching a stack of confusing papers, her face a mask of fear. I looked at the young lawyers, and then back at my grandfather's laughing face. "Okay," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Here is what we do. We are not going to let the vulnerable wait 20 years to be believed. We are not going to let them be told they have no one to complain to. We are going to be their voice. That is how we honor an old man who was thrown out of his home on Christmas Eve, but who never, ever gave up." I walked to the window, my hand touching the frame of my grandfather's picture. I watched as the old woman was welcomed inside, as a lawyer sat her down, as she was, for the first time, being heard. The fight was over. The work had just begun. The revenge had become a legacy, and that, I knew, was the only victory that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.